Ford has spent 6 decades trying to convince the world that a pony car could still matter in an age obsessed with silence and screens. And for the first time, the argument feels genuinely settled. I'm bringing you this one from Automotive Pulse, the place where we stop chasing marketing language and start asking what a car actually means to the person who buys it. Before we get into the way this thing sounds when it wakes up, there's a decision buried in its chassis that Ford's engineers debated for years, one that trades a little bit of outright grip for something almost nobody expected from a modern Mustang, and we'll get to exactly why that choice matters. This is the realistic next-generation vision for the Ford Mustang, a projected interpretation of where the nameplate is heading as Ford continues to evolve its performance lineup, built on believable engineering direction rather than official confirmation. What Ford appears to be targeting is not reinvention for its own sake, but a sharpening of everything the Mustang has always represented, filtered through a decade of chassis knowledge, aerodynamic research, and a stubborn refusal to let the V8 fade quietly into history. Stand in front of it, and the first thing you notice is restraint. The nose has been pulled tighter to the road, the character line running from the front fender to the door, cut with more intention than aggression, communicating control rather than shouting for attention. The tri-bar lighting signature remains, because Ford understands that some visual language is not decoration, it's identity, and removing it would be like removing the pony badge itself. The hood carries functional heat extraction vents rather than styling exercises, hinting at a cooling philosophy built for sustained track use rather than a single quarter-mile pull. The greenhouse has been lowered slightly, the roofline stretched with a fastback tension that makes the car look like it's already moving while parked. Wide rear haunches flare out over staggered wheels, and underneath, a subtle diffuser and functional splitter suggest a car that has been developed in a wind tunnel, not just a design studio. Every proportion here is engineered to communicate confidence without desperation. A muscle car that no longer needs to prove anything, only to deliver. Open the door and the cabin greets you like a space that was actually lived in during development, not assembled from a parts catalog. The seating position is low and purposeful, the bolstering firm enough to hold you through a corner without turning a highway cruise into punishment. The steering wheel is thick-rimmed, flat-bottomed, wrapped in a texture that feels tacky under warm hands, exactly the kind of grip you want when the rear tires start talking. Materials blend brushed aluminum look trim with soft-touch surfaces and stitched leather that carries a faint, honest scent of tannin rather than synthetic overlay. The digital gauge cluster sits recessed behind the wheel, clean and legible, while the central touchscreen is angled toward the driver rather than presented as a tablet bolted to the dash. At idle, the cabin is remarkably composed, insulation and acoustic glass keeping wind and road noise distant enough that conversation never has to compete with the car. Ambient lighting traces the door panels and center console in a low blue glow at night, giving the interior a quiet, focused atmosphere rather than a nightclub one. This is a cabin engineered to feel like a second home for someone who spends real hours behind the wheel, not a showroom prop meant to be photographed and forgotten. Ford's projected engineering direction keeps faith with what has always made the Mustang emotionally legitimate. A supercharged V8 sitting up front, engineered around a target output believed to land between 800 and 850 horsepower, paired with a torque curve tuned for immediate physical response rather than a peaky, high-strung delivery. Power is expected to route through a dual-clutch transmission offering rapid, decisive shifts, alongside a traditional manual option for buyers who still believe driving should require both hands and a working left leg. This is where the earlier tease resolves itself, because Ford's engineers reportedly chose a slightly softer rear spring rate than outright lap time optimization would demand. A decision that sacrifices a fraction of ultimate cornering grip in exchange for a chassis that stays predictable and communicative when the driver pushes past the limit, rather than snapping without warning. It's a controversial trade in an era obsessed with Nürburgring numbers, but it's also the kind of decision that keeps a muscle car feeling like a muscle car instead of a clinical lap time machine. Twist the key, or more accurately, press the ignition, and the startup behaves like a controlled detonation. A half-second of starter whir before the supercharged V8 catches and settles into a low, uneven idle that shakes the mirrors just slightly, the exhaust burbling with barely restrained intent. At low throttle, it stays civil, a muscular rumble rather than a tantrum. But the moment your foot goes down, the supercharger whine layers over the exhaust note like a second voice joining the first, and the acceleration arrives with a violent, chest-level shove that flattens conversation. Each gear shift lands with a mechanical thud you feel through the seat rails as much as hear, quick enough to keep the tachometer needle from ever really resting. Push toward the red line, and the note sharpens into something raw and almost angry. Cabin isolation falling away just enough to let the drama in without letting the discomfort follow, so you're rewarded with sound rather than punished by it. This is a car engineered to sound exactly as aggressive as it drives, with nothing synthesized about the experience. The first moments of actual motion tell you everything the specification sheet can't. Steering weight builds naturally off-center, giving genuine feedback about surface texture rather than filtering it into silence. And throttle response feels immediate, almost eager, translating small inputs into real forward motion rather than lag, followed by a delayed surge. Brake pedal feel is firm and progressive, the initial bite confident without feeling grabby, giving the driver real trust in modulating speed rather than guessing. Over broken pavement, the suspension absorbs harshness without disconnecting you from the road, communicating exactly enough texture to feel alive underneath you. Turn into a corner, and the chassis balances itself with a rear-biased confidence. Front end darting in eagerly, while the back end holds its composure, that softer spring tune from earlier revealing itself as forgiving rather than nervous when you ask more of it than you probably should on public roads. The seats hold you through the transition without ever feeling restrictive. And there's a genuine physical reaction in that first hard pull, the kind of moment where your breath catches slightly before the grin arrives. None of this happens in isolation from real life. Adaptive driver assistance systems work quietly in the background, ready to support you on a long highway stretch without ever taking the experience away from you. While connectivity and over-the-air update capability mean the car keeps improving long after it leaves the dealership rather than aging the moment it's purchased. Safety systems are woven in as a reassuring presence rather than a constant lecture. And despite everything happening under the hood, there's still a usable trunk, comfortable rear seat tolerance for shorter trips, and enough long-distance composure that a cross-country run wouldn't feel like punishment. Pricing is expected to land somewhere in the mid-$60,000 range for higher trims, positioned as a genuine step above the outgoing GT without drifting into territory that competes with dedicated European performance coupes. Framed against what you're actually getting: a hand-tuned supercharged V8 experience. A chassis engineered for emotional feedback rather than spreadsheet lap times, and a nameplate with 6 uninterrupted decades of cultural weight behind it. The number starts to feel less like a price tag and more like admission to something increasingly rare. You're not just paying for horsepower. You're paying for the growing scarcity of a manufacturer still willing to build a car this emotionally honest, positioned against the broader landscape. This next-generation Mustang reads less like a segment disruptor and more like a legacy revival executed with modern precision. A reminder that the American muscle car format still has somewhere meaningful left to go. It's aimed at the driver who still believes a car should demand something from you, someone who values the mechanical relationship between right foot and rear tires over a spec sheet full of autonomous conveniences, someone who wants a Sunday morning on an empty 2-lane highway to actually feel like an event rather than a commute. The honest compromise here is worth saying plainly, because a car this emotionally committed to feel isn't going to post the flattest lap times in its class, and buyers chasing pure numbers over pure feeling may find themselves better served elsewhere. That's not a flaw so much as a declaration of priorities. Picture it on an empty desert highway at sunrise, heat shimmering off the asphalt ahead, engine note rolling out across nothing but open horizon, and you start to understand exactly what Ford is still trying to protect. So subscribe if you want more of these honest deep dives into what these cars actually mean, and tell me in the comments, Does a modern muscle car still deserve to prioritize feel over lap time numbers? Or has that argument quietly become outdated in 2027? The 2027 Mustang doesn't ask to be understood, it asks to be felt. This video is based on current automotive industry insights, publicly available information, design analysis, and reliable reporting available at the time of writing. Specifications, features, pricing, performance figures, production plans, and launch timelines discussed here are estimates and projections only, subject to change, and should not be considered officially confirmed unless formally announced by Ford Motor Company.